Yo guys, what is going on? Lucky here, and I think that if you play World of Tanks regularly, you may or may not have noticed that sometimes some nations in World of Tanks, Russia, just seem to have that extra bit of luck or that extra RNG factor that you seem to be missing yourself for some reason. And I think that I am not the only one who notices that 9 out of 10 times the Russian vehicles tend to out RNG, if that's even a word, most other nations in the game. So I started thinking, is it just pure coincidence that this keeps happening with mostly Russian vehicles for me? Or did Wargaming deliberately sneak in some secret little game code that gives Russian tanks just that extra RNG boost that I seem to notice often or not? Or in other words, does World of Tanks really suffer from Russian bias? Or is it just nothing more than a silly joke that developed itself over the past years? So if you have been asking yourself the same question lately, then you've clicked on the right video. Because today I'm going to put the possible effects of Russian bias in World of Tanks finally to the test. And why do I say finally? Well, funny enough, up until a certain point in time, Russian bias has been almost impossible to accurately test and experiment on, because there are pretty much no tanks in the game with the exact same in-game stats who only differ by one factor, which is their nation, of course. But that was up until some time ago when Wargaming released the first multinational tank, the T-3485 Rudy, which is a pretty standard T-3485 tank, but with a currently unique feature to become Russian or Polish with a simple press of a button. Which for me was the perfect opportunity to finally accurately test the possible effects of Russian bias in World of Tanks, and to finally give you guys a clear answer to this everlasting question. So how am I planning to put the possible Russian bias effect to the test? Well, first of all, I decided to split this video up into two different parts, with part 1 being me putting the raw stats of both Russian and the Polish Rudy to the test in a controlled environment. So here I'll be testing the things like damage rolls, armor effectiveness, speed and accuracy performance in a set test setup in order to see if their raw in-game stats, which should be the exact same, still differ by any means possible. But experimenting in a lab-like environment is all fun and games, but I bet you guys will also be interested in the overall performance differences between the two in random battle scenarios, which will be featured in part 2 of this video, which will be all about me playing a bunch of battles with both the Russian and the Polish Rudy and highlighting any possible remarkable events and possible overall in-game performance differences. So if you don't want to miss out on the in-game experiment featured in part 2, then feel free to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon right next to it so you will be immediately notified when part 2 goes live. But in this video, which will be part 1, we're just gonna be straight diving into the raw numbers and technical terms of World of Tanks' possible Russian bias. Alright, so welcome to part 1 of the Russian bias experiment. So now, with the intro out of the way, let's give you guys a quick rundown of what we're all gonna be testing in this video. And also feel free to skip to any of the experiments you like, since all the corresponding timestamps are in the description as well. So in this experiment, I'll be covering the possible effects of Russian bias on aiming and shot accuracy, damage rolls and module damage, penetration capabilities, and overall tank mobility. So now, with all the parts covered, let's get straight into the experiments themselves. But before we're gonna start, just one very last thing before we get into the test. I just quickly want to mention that I performed all these tests a lot more times than you can actually see on your screen. And I'll be taking all the test results into account when forming a conclusion, of course. So in case you're thinking I've only performed each test once or twice or so, then don't worry at all, it's literally a fuck ton more than that. God, my hands can still feel it. So with that out of the way, let's finally get started with the experiment. Starting off with the possible effect of Russian bias on aiming and shot accuracy. So this and almost all the other tests in this video, we're gonna be traveling to the map Airfield, since it provides the best flat terrain to test our parameters on. So for our accuracy test, we're gonna be giving each Rudy 20 shots in total to fire against a tank that is roughly 350 meters away, while being fully aimed from a stationary position, and also while being on the move when the aim circle is going all smaller and bigger. So will the Russian Rudy do better than the Polish one? You know what? Let's find out. So let's see if we can reliably hit the KV-4 in this distance. And as you can see, both Rudies have pretty much no trouble hitting the KV-4 reliably when stationary, since after 10 shots or so, each of them seem to perform identical, with some rare occasional misses on both ends. But when the Rudies started to both deliberately mess up their aiming circle, things suddenly got a little bit suspicious. Since not only on this try, but on most of the other off-camera tries, I noticed that the Russian Rudi, in the 5 times I repeated this test, only missed its target once. While the Polish Rudi, on the other hand, never managed to hit every single of his 10 shots in one try, and even missed a total of 11 shots in all the tries combined. And to be honest, I find this rather suspicious indeed, since in my opinion these numbers seem a little bit too big to just be coincidental. But before concluding anything, let's just see what the rest of the tests have to offer for us. So with the accuracy out of the way, let's quickly move on to the next test, which will be the potential effect of Russian bias on a tank's damage rolls. So this setup is very simple. Both the Russian and Polish Rudi get 5 shots each, and after these 5 shots we'll be simply taking a look if the Russian Rudi overall rolled noticeably higher or got noticeably more critical hits than the Polish Rudi. So let's go back to airfield again and let's find out. So here we go, both Rudies line up behind some KV-4S. So let's see what those 5 shells can do on both ends. So to be honest, at first it seemed like the Russian Rudi was scoring a lot more critical hits than the Polish one, but after repeating this for the 8th time or so, the Polish Rudi started to get more critical hits than the Russian one. So I guess RNG can really be unpredictable sometimes. And the same goes for the damage rolls, of course, since if you average out all the total damage, you again can't really spot a massive difference, which would imply that World of Tanks really suffers from Russian bias, at least on the damage side. So let's move on to test number 3, where we're going to be taking a look at the potential effect of Russian bias on shell penetration. And in order to put this to the test, we're again going to give both Rudies 20 shots each, and we're going to see if there is any noticeable bias with the orange penetration markers, which usually should be a 50-50 of panning a shot or not. So will it maybe be a 60-40 for the Russian Rudi? Who knows? Let's roll out the KV-4's 150mm thick side armor, which should be around the 30-ish% chance of panning with the Rudi's standard 144mm penetrating AP rounds. So is that also the case? Let's find out. So just like the previous test, there didn't seem to be any Russian bias whatsoever. But instead it almost seems that there was some Polish bias, since the Polish Rudi also managed to not only pan a lot of its shots, but also set the KV-4 on fire rather quickly. But after some more tries, I managed to do the exact same with the Russian Rudi a couple tries later. And if we take a look at the total shots panned over all the tries, there is yet again no sign of any Russian bias to be seen. So yeah guys, that only leaves us with one more test to go for part 1, which is going to be the possible effect of Russian bias on the Rudi's mobility. So in this test, I'm gonna drive a set distance on a straight bridge on the map highway, as well as a full 360-degree turn with both the Russian and the Polish Rudi, in order to see if the Russian Rudi is any faster by any means. So yeah, quite simple, no need to ramble on about, so let's see if we can discover any difference. Alright, welcome everybody to the infamous highway bridge. So before we're gonna blast down the bridge, let's first do a quick measure with a full 360-degree turn. And as you can see, the results and the time it takes are pretty much identical. But how about the speed on a straight line? You know what, let's find that out as well. And yet again, if we take into account that the starting positions weren't 100% accurate, the result at least are still pretty damn identical. So also for mobility, I couldn't really seem to spot any noticeable Russian bias for the Russian Rudy. Alright guys, so that pretty much wraps up part 1 of the Russian bias experiment. So, conclusion time. Apart from the aiming RNG while moving the tank, I couldn't really seem to spot any other form of Russian bias hidden in the other 3 experiments. So at least for the end conclusion of part 1 of this experiment, I am still kinda doubtful, but for now I'm just going to say that it is plausible that there is some form of Russian bias hidden in World of Tanks' aiming system. But in order to confirm it, I think I'm gonna wait until I have done part 2 of this experiment as well, just to be absolutely sure. So if you want to see part 2 right away, then click on the first link in the description down below to continue on into the experiment. Or if you're one of the early birds watching, that means that most likely part 2 won't be online yet. So if you won't miss out in part 2, then make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon right next to it so you'll be among the first to get notified when part 2 goes live. And also while you're at it, please give the video a thumbs up since it would really help out the channel by a lot, and also drop a comment down below what you think about Russian bias. Do you believe it's real, or do you think it's nothing more than just a lived out meme? Make sure to let me know down below. But until then, I'm just going to say, as always, have an awesome day, and I'll catch you guys later.